Hi and welcome. And it's a scary big picture of myself. All right. First and foremost, thank you for taking the time. Alex and I will look forward to spending the better part of an hour together with you. It's always a bit different to present yourself, but as seen on the slide, I have a background from the armed forces, various things there. I left the Royal Danish Air Force as head of radar training. Since then, I worked as a training manager for Siemens, back when it was just called Siemens Wind Power. Now it's Siemens Gamesa, and I've also been a head of training for MTI Vestas. I'm quite keen on learning transfer and learning retention, so I always get kind of psyched and very happy when dealing with training design and development, and also optimization. And from a very skewed angle, you could say that the COVID situation is also it's called a fuel for that these days. But today we're going to be talking about the enhanced first aid, which I will cover, and then Alex will do the advanced rescue. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself a bit?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. My name is Alex Booker. I've been in the wind industry for 14 years. I worked for Vestas in various different roles, going from being a service technician through to installation, commissioning, and then ended up in the training school and done many different things in my time in Vestas. I have a background in aviation and fishing, actually. I spent some time on fishing trawlers. And like Jakob, I do get really kind of into learning and developing training and stuff. So, and the COVID situation has actually really given us the opportunity to develop some pretty cool stuff, actually. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that pans out in the industry. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess I'll go first, as the agenda kind of stipulates that. As seen, at the end, we'll have time for questions. Ralph will manage that for us because, well, we're guys, so we try to minimize the multitasking. We're going to go through it just at a leisurely pace. If, however, it goes too fast, just put a comment into the chat. I know that Ralph is monitoring it, so he will let us know.
Yep,
good.
Go ahead, Jakob.
Good. All right. So before we kind of go into the nitty-gritty details of the two reviews, just a quick kind of elaboration on how we normally do things. Based on our governance models, where we have a training committee consisting of our members, training representatives, and audit compliance committees that essentially ensure that we are on track and within regulation, and the executive committee, we have two, let's call it drop dates or product drop dates every year. So at the end of the, well, start of the first quarter, I guess, we release new standards, reviewed modules and governance documents, and we do the very same at the end of the year in the fourth quarter. So you'll notice that we normally kind of send out surveys, etc., that you'll find, especially as training providers and other stakeholders, in your mailbox anywhere from the end of the second quarter to very start of third quarter, etc. So there's a, let's call it a logic behind the madness sometimes. So we work very much in normal stage gate, let's call it processes. So it's scoping, designing, developing, implementing, and then reviewing. Behind the release cycle, I think it's important to mention that whenever we release new product, then a year goes by, and then we do a review of that. And that's quite simply because we get a lot of new learnings when we release something. We of course strive to get it right the first time, but there will always be some things. And then after the first review that comes a year after, then we go into 2-year cycles. There are some updates, so we're in the future we're going to try to review all the BST modules at the same time, and the BTT modules together with the installation that is dependent on the BTT, etc. But you can follow this on our website. Next slide, please. both Alex and I, we mentioned we're a bit geeky, and this here is it's a prettier drawing that I can make myself. But in North America, there's a university called Bethesda University, where some very, very clever people has done a lot of work and published a broadly recognized model. Talks about how much you can remember 2 months after actually receiving what's called a training input or learning input. And so, and this is, I guess, there's a bit of irony in this. If we look at the very top of it, so reading, lecture, audiovisual, which is kind of where we are right now, you won't remember much of that after 2 months' time. And as we kind of go down in the model, and we look at demonstration, discussion group, practice, and then teaching others, people start to remember things. As a guideline in our training standards, we want to have like 70% in the practical area or in what is called the activity area. So because there's passive and active learning, right? And as a general rule, you could say from demonstration and up, or audiovisual actually and up, that's the passive, and down below that, that's the active one. So we aim for 70% in the active learning area.
Just to clarify, Jakob, active, you mean in this case it says participatory, that they're the same two phrases, right?
Yeah,
yeah,
it is very much so, yes. And that's kind of our ambition, and we're happy that both of the modules that we're presenting that has been reviewed today is within that. So we're actually more than happy. We're quite proud of that. It's a very simple model, but it covers what we believe in. Good, thank you. So first and foremost, before we get into the project team, etc., it's quite often interesting to look at, let's call it the area that a training standard kind of engages. And if you look at the enhanced first aid, which was initially created to look at very much remote areas on and offshore, we're seeing new technologies. So we have floating technologies, so offshore turbines can go out even further. We're also seeing that the wind industry is entering new markets that has a lot of more remote sites onshore as well. So it is very, very much an area that we have focused on, and it's always good to see that a product has its place in the world also after it being launched. Good, thank you. Next slide, please. The working group, and it's always cool to see how a working group is put together and how it works. And in this case, as with many other initial reviews, because they come a year after release, there's quite often a lot of training providers, because that is a key element for us to learn from. When we go into the normal kind of review cycle of 2 years, we'll see more operators, more manufacturers, etc., in the group, because then we focus a bit more on changes of the risk environment. It's not often that the risk environment changes a lot within a year, but the learning, understanding, and how we deliver a fresh product, there's a lot to get there from the training providers. So we're incredibly happy to have had Rely On, AIS, Offtech, etc., as part of this working group, Maersk Training as well, and had some brilliant people. We also have, due to the nature of the training standard, doctors involved in this, and paramedics, etc. So it's been a great working group, and we're thrilled to be able to release the enhanced first aid revision today, version 2. Next slide, please. Good. So always when we look at a training standard, it's important when it's developed, but also when it's reviewed, to stay aligned. Why do we have this training standard? So it's clear that we have a lot of remote areas, offshore and onshore. I come from the armed forces. I spent 16 years there. We talk about the golden hour. So you need to really be in control with whatever person has been harmed and manage to stabilize them as best possible and get the assistance that you need, because there are some really critical minutes here. So the enhanced first aid is critical in that. It's all about stabilizing and keeping a casualty alive till they're rescued. There's also a special element in this fact that it's aligned with the GWO, which is a German standard for this. And that alignment, and I'll get back to that, still sticks to this day. The practical information hasn't really changed. The trainer to delegate ratio remains the same. There is a tiny caveat on that, and I'll get back to that in the equipment area, but I'll touch upon that when we look at the changes. And it's 24 hours duration. You saw the split as mentioned earlier. It is important to say before we go forward that we have actually not made a lot of changes to this standard. You'll see when Alex gets to the advanced rescue that there'll be more changes there. But so far so good. Next slide, please. So we have, however, just to get everything into the new and updated kind of format, it's been some, let's call it face value changes. The change log's been updated, equipment list, etc., and overall changes. So I'll go through that one by one. Next slide, please. So the formatting. So we're very much in understanding of most organizations. They either have an ISO setup or something similar, and we are trying to align fully with that. So earlier we had a lot of bullets, etc., in the training standard. Everything's being numbered, asterisks, etc. So we know where things are, and it can be referred to a quality management system. So we hope that an update such as this will kind of assist our training providers and also customers and everybody else in navigating the documents and being able to, for instance, look in the change log and then find the point straight away and see, okay, what's going on here? How do we adapt the training to that? Next slide, please. We made it. Sometimes there's a slide that is hopefully self-explanatory, right? If you look left-hand side, it's well, it is basic, but it's also a bit hard to read, to be honest. Right-hand side, where it says 3 change log, easier. It's in bullets. It's just very much clearer. So we hope that this is appreciated. If you're into details, you'll love stuff like this. And to be honest, it rocks my boat, so I'm happy about it. Next slide, please. Oh, good. I mentioned the equipment list. So it's been moved to an annex. Good. It's simplified. I think what is, but from a training quality perspective, what is even more important to mention is that there has been some updates to the numbers of equipment. So you can make sure that the delegates, they maximize their time with equipment and thereby learning output. So as a training provider or as a delegate, make sure that that this is adhered to. We think it's a great kind of thing that goes on top of the small changes. It's a small change, but with a big output, I would say. Next slide, please. So, as you can see, not a lot of key changes. We have aligned the standard, and when I say aligned, there's actually been more of a verification because the alignment points have been few and far between. But it has also enabled that there could be a reference to the International Liaison Committee of Resuscitation. I got that right in first try, ILCOR. Which means that we have more global outreach. It's some of the things. Alex is actually working on a project, a global alignment project, where we, for instance, look at in the training standards, we have some, in the old ones, we have them referrals to European norm XYZ number something. And we're trying to align better globally. So there's also an ANSI code, there's an BST, EN, etc. So having not only updating our equipment, what's called referrals, we also want to make sure that organizational that we aligned with best practice. Training staff. So one of the things that we work on continuously, and Ralph talked a bit about an update to requirement coming in the future, is that we want to be more and more crisp on who can deliver a GWO training, because it is a contributing factor to knowing the output, if you know the level of input as well. So we're happy with that. There's some small updates, and feel free to have a look at them. A small thing that was removed though and not added was CPR on children. It's an important area, but it's not something that should happen on a wind turbine farm, and it taking out enabled us to free up time for wind turbine environment relevant exercises. It's of course an area that we, from GWO standpoint, encourage that everybody has knowledge of, but we believe it should be sought in the approval. In the correct place. Also, in addition, traffic-related accidents. We always do surveys, and we do them in multiple ways. We gather data both. We have these tables where whenever somebody sends us an email, we punch in the feedback, and or we keep the email depending on. And then when we get to the review, we have that as one data source. Another data source is what the working group brings us in terms of risk assessments and also just knowledge from the industry. And perhaps more important one is what we send out to everybody, all stakeholders. We send out surveys saying, please provide input on this. And that survey showed that traffic-related accidents should be covered in your training standards, so therefore it has been added. So we're very happy and fortunate to have so many people who are willing to spend time on the surveys and provide the feedback. So thank you. Next slide, please. Normally, we, and also in this case, we do an FAQ at the end of, let's call it each presentation. And is there a refresh option? Yeah, there is, as normal. Can the elements be moved around? That's a common question we get. Yes, but be mindful that you cannot reduce on the duration of practical elements, and you can move the theory into the practical if you so desire. The things needed to run the module, covered that. Annex 3 is your friend. One of the things that's very up in time, can it be done digitally? Well, there are digital training requirements out there from GWO. Go have a look. Window code, same. We touched upon the child CPR, so I won't repeat that. Is it still aligned with GWV? After the review, yes, it is. Fun fact is that GWV actually aligned mostly towards GWO, and we're quite proud of that fact. Is it only for offshore? No, it's for remote sites mainly. Of course, you can use it anywhere, but I mean, that's kind of the motivation. So on and offshore. This is the place where I normally ask, are there questions? And I know there are, and we'll get to them at the end. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody, and thank you, Jakob. So I'm going to talk to you about the review of the advanced rescue training. So, and again, I'll start with the project team actually. I would like to say thank you to the guys who participated. As our former chairman used to say, that GWO is owned by the industry and we work for the industry. So without the input of our members and our training providers into the review of training standards, we wouldn't be able to do that. So a massive thank you to the people involved, and just anybody that's interested in volunteering for working groups that are subject matter experts in our training standards, please feel free to reach out to info at GWO and just register your interest there. Thank you. So next slide, please, Ralph. One previous, that one, yes, thank you. So the motivation. No problem. The motivation for ART, very similar to the EFA, that turbines are getting further away and therefore further away from help. So we need to be able to get people out of difficult situations without grown-ups being there to help us. So without the professional rescue services. So ART is aimed at doing that. Other motivations, well, this is part of our review process. And part of that review process is at the bottom there about how we act, or what we look at in a review. So we actually look at the current risk environment in the industry, and does the training still address that? We look at taxonomy, we look at the instructor to participant ratio, the practical to theory, and then if there's changes that need to be made in line with other changes to other standards. So in this case, working on manual handling, and I will talk about that in a second. The thing that's not mentioned here is actually that we also rely heavily on the input from the surveys. So a number of the changes that have been made have been brought about actually because of survey comments. So it's really important for us to have the input from you guys when we put surveys out to enable us to actually make the training better. Overall, trainer to course participant ratio is the same. That has not changed. So theory elements 1 to 12, practical elements 1 to 4. Couple of minor duration changes, and these are the overall durations. So the ART initial is now 29 hours, 25 minutes. So it's 55 minutes shorter overall. And the refresher is 20 hours and 45 minutes, which is 15 minutes longer overall. It is around 80% practical exercises with about 20% theory. So, but I'll talk some more detail into those changes. As Jakob went through, we aligned the formatting throughout all of the training portfolio. So ART and the refresher, same. The word delegate has been replaced with course participant or participant throughout. And that's in line with the changes to the new requirement documents that are coming out. We have aligned the phrasing throughout, of course, spelling and grammar corrections. We have included manual handling elements into the ART initial training. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on. But basically, manual handling causes a lot of injuries, so we're trying to change the mindset of the people working in the wind industry about looking after themselves. So you'll see some manual handling elements included in the ART initial. Lesson 6, we've changed one of the learning objectives, and we've put some clarification around the use of an improvised harness. And this was a question that came up during the survey. So we put some clarification in there that using a rescue sling to make an improvised harness is only for pulling somebody out of a tight space. It is not intended for lifting in any way, shape or form. Other things, we've aligned with GWO, with the basic safety training. So the taxonomy, the generic approach to equipment, the introduction and the evaluation have been, their times have been aligned throughout the ART to 15 minutes. And then lessons 3 and 9 have been updated and aligned with basic safety training. The course codes for ART, ARTH, exactly the same as they were before. So, and yes. So overall, for the hub rescue module, I've included the table, and it's a lot of information. There's some minor things like time changes by 10, 15 minutes or no changes. But lesson 3, the content of that, because we actually, when we did the review of BST version 13, we included that lesson in there. And that was actually a copy from the old ART. And we updated it to include equipment checks and body checks and warm-up exercises So we've just aligned the phrasing now in ART with what we did in BST, and then aligned the times as well. Then lesson 4, head support during rescue. The name has changed and the duration has increased. And if you could go to the next slide, please, Ralph. Yes. So, and I'm going to talk about that lesson 4 in just a sec. Again, similar throughout the nacelle tower and basement rescue module, timing and alignment with BST, no huge changes, apart from maybe lesson 9 has been introduced, and that is because the nacelle tower and basement is 2 days, and that measures to prevent injury should actually be repeated on both days. It's a way of clarifying that and making that as an important point for the participants. And then lesson 4, and this applies hub rescue and nacelle. The name has changed from cervical collar to head support, and we've increased the duration. And if I could go to the next slide now, Ralph, please. So this came up as a comment in the survey, and the comment was saying that the first aid guidelines, so from the European Resuscitation Council and the American Heart Association, were warning against the routine use of cervical collars. And having done quite a lot of reading, yes, they do actually warn against the routine use because there are some risks that have been demonstrated through that use. Now, this was researched and it was discussed by subject matter experts in that field. And what we are actually doing in advanced rescue is we are using a cervical collar as a means to not immobilize the spine, but actually to support the head during extrication. So if you've got a person that is trapped, say, under a gearbox, and you're trying to get them out and they're unconscious, the head is going to flop around. And there are many ways to actually stop that. You can use manual inline stabilization, so where a person physically holds the head, or you can use a spine board with head blocks. The problem is with both of those that if you're in a situation where a person is trapped under a gearbox or in an enclosed space, then you may not have that option. You may not be able to get a spine board with head blocks in there, or you may not be able to actually physically get a person to actually support the head. So in these limited cases, then the assessment from the working group and the experts was that this does not constitute routine use, seeing as we are using it as a means to support the head, and by supporting the head, maintain the airway and prevent further injury. Now, that does mean, of course, that from the outside, and as the survey comment sort of suggested, that there was maybe a misunderstanding about the content and the aim of the lesson. So what we have done is we've included a warning about cervical collars and the risks. We've covered those risks in the lesson and mitigation steps. And we have also put in there that you must train alternative methods to using a collar, a cervical collar. We've updated the aim to make it very clear, and we have added a new Annex 6, which explains the use of cervical collars in a rescue situation. The alternative measures, there are many different ways of actually supporting the head, and quite often you can do it through using a jacket rolled up, or a blanket, or a towel. You can use it, you can support the head with newspaper, you can support the head with many different things. So the idea is to actually increase the toolbox available to technicians in the field so that they don't rely on cervical collars, but they can actually support the head with other means. So next slide, please, Ralph. Then throughout both the initial ART and the refresher, then we have gone through and we have, as far as possible, it's not entirely possible, but we have, as far as we can, put all of the taxonomy action verbs at either explain or demonstrate. There are a couple of others in there, but primarily we've tried to use explain and demonstrate. And the reason we've done that is to make it very clear to the training provider what is the expected thing in that case. So is it something to do with knowledge, or is it an actual skill part of the module or the lesson? After all of the learning objectives, we have also added the indicators. So for example, L2 knowledge, level 2 knowledge, or L3 skill, or L3 attitude, and again, it is to clarify to the training provider what it is that we expect from those objectives and from those elements. And we have also, throughout all of the instructor actions, so in the elements themselves, not just the learning objectives, we have highlighted those action verbs in bold text, so it's really clear what we mean. So, next slide. Then the refresher. Again, formatting is aligned, the delegate has been replaced with course participant, phrasing, spelling and grammar. The manual handling refresher is now included in the art refresher, and that was because we brought out the combined module for the BST package. So we potentially have participants now who are coming in to do their ART refresher. They're refreshing their working at heights, but they wouldn't be refreshing their manual handling. So the idea is that we can actually refresh the manual handling as part of the advanced rescue refresher. And again, I'm going to talk about manual handling a little bit in a second. Alignment with BST, again, the generic approach to equipment, lessons 4 and 8 for measures to prevent injury, and the introduction and the evaluation. The course codes, same as they were, with the addition of MHR for manual handling. So next slide, please, Ralph. So with the introduction of manual handling, we have actually increased lesson 3 by 15 minutes, and we've renamed it. So it was working at height knowledge review. It is now knowledge review because it doesn't just cover working at heights. Lesson 4, same concept as alignment with BST. And then we've included a new lesson, lesson 5, on manual handling. And that lesson 5 is dedicated purely to manual handling and manual handling exercises. And then the idea is that the training provider and the instructor then, after this, after some basic exercises in manual handling, will then coach the participants throughout all of the rest of the training on their manual handling techniques and what they're actually doing and how they then apply that to their daily work. So when we're talking about like doing rescue exercises, how does the participants actually think about their own ergonomics and their manual handling during rescue, but also how do they approach moving equipment around when they're not actually doing exercises? So it's to really change the mindset of the participants to really focus on looking after themselves and preventing injuries. Yeah, overall, we've increased the time of the module by 30 minutes. Next slide, please, Ralph. I digressed a little bit and I talked about this, but manual handling and poor manual handling is a really significant cause of injuries in the wind industry. And it's something that needs to be addressed, and it's something that has its roots in not just a sort of training, but also a mindset and an attitude of the people working in the industry. So one of the things we're trying to do is actually bring manual handling elements across the portfolio, so we can actually change the mindset of the technicians working in the field by having them really focus on, in training, how do I mitigate those injuries? And again, bringing a proactive and positive mindset to injury reduction. So new element, new lesson, and this is where we really need the help of the instructors to assess and develop the participants throughout all of that training about their manual handling behavior. So, next slide, please, Ralph. And then the FAQs, refresher, yes, ARTR version 2 went live on the 1st of April. One of the questions I was asked is ART only aimed at offshore turbines? And no, it is not. It talks a lot about offshore specific things. So it talks a lot about getting an injured person down to the transition piece and then onto a vessel. But those skills and those techniques can actually be used in both on and offshore turbines. So where, for instance, you're teaching a class where you only have onshore technicians, then those elements, of course, you need to cover them, but you should also try and get the participants to discuss how they would apply that in an onshore situation. Does the refresher refresh both working heights and manual handling? Yes, and the course codes are there. The review of BST version 13, we changed the requirement for the anchor point height, and we actually made it into a recommendation with some additional control measures if you go below 6.75 meters. And those changes also apply to the advanced rescue training, both initial and refresher. The instructor to participant ratio has not changed. And this was one of the things we discussed in the working group, because with BST version 13, it was changed. And for advanced rescue, the working group considered that, well, actually the risks doing ART training is actually higher than the basic safety training. Therefore, we need to have the instructors with more focus and therefore a lower instructor to delegate ratio for ART. So we did not change that. Contact time is the delivery of the lessons and the exercises. It does not include breaks and like moving between classrooms and things like that. And of course, the theory elements, can they be put into the practical? Yes. And provided that you can ensure the safety of the participants or the delegates, then please do put the theory elements into the practical elements. It's much, much better for the learning transfer and for the retention of knowledge for the participants. So